Imagine a world where one city doesn't just rule a nation, it rules the known world. A city where marble temples touch the sky, where roads stretch farther than the eye can see, where armies march with unstoppable precision, and where the name Rome echoes like thunder across continents. This is not just a city, this is power itself. And for centuries, nothing seemed capable of shaking it. But here's the twist. Even the greatest giants can fall, and when they do, the sound echoes through history forever. It begins not with collapse, but with glory. Picture the Roman Empire at its peak around the 2nd century AD. Under emperors like Augustus and Trajan, Rome wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. Its borders stretched from the misty hills of Britain to the burning sands of Egypt, from the Atlantic Ocean to the edges of Mesopotamia. Millions lived under its rule, speaking different languages, worshiping different gods, yet all connected by one powerful idea: Rome. Roads, perfectly engineered, connected distant lands like veins in a living body. Trade flowed endlessly. Gold, silk, spices, knowledge, everything moved through Rome. And at the center of it all stood the emperor, seen not just as a ruler, but almost as a god. Imagine walking through the streets of Rome itself. Crowds everywhere, senators debating in grand halls, gladiators fighting in the Colosseum as thousands cheer, fountains flowing, markets buzzing, soldiers standing guard in shining armor. It feels eternal, unbreakable. But beneath this beauty, beneath the order and discipline, something darker is slowly growing. Because power always comes at a cost. And then everything begins to shift. After the death of strong emperors like Marcus Aurelius, Rome enters a dangerous phase. Leadership becomes unstable. Emperors are no longer chosen for wisdom or strength, but often for power, money, or sheer luck. Some rule for years, others for months, some don't even last weeks. Assassinations become common, betrayal becomes normal. The throne of Rome, once a symbol of stability, turns into a deadly game. Imagine being a citizen during this time. One day you wake up and there's a new emperor. A few months later, another one. Loyalty means nothing. Trust disappears. And slowly the people begin to feel it. The ground beneath them is no longer steady. But here's where it gets worse. Rome's size, once its greatest strength, becomes its biggest weakness. Managing such a massive empire is not easy. Communication is slow, decisions take time, and enemies are everywhere. Along the borders, tribes and kingdoms watch closely. They wait, they study Rome's weaknesses. Meanwhile, inside the empire, problems begin to pile up. The economy starts to crack. Taxes rise higher and higher as the government struggles to maintain its massive army and infrastructure. Farmers suffer. Trade slows down. Inflation rises. Money loses value. Imagine working harder every day, yet being able to afford less. Frustration grows. Anger spreads. And then there's corruption. Officials take bribes. Leaders think more about their own power than the empire's survival. The system that once made Rome strong begins to rot from within. It's slow at first, almost invisible, but like a disease, it spreads. And then comes another turning point. The Roman military, once the most feared force in the world, begins to change. In its golden days, Roman soldiers were disciplined, loyal, and proud citizens of the empire. They fought not just for money, but for Rome itself. But now, things are different. Recruiting Roman citizens becomes harder. People don't want to fight anymore. Why risk your life for an empire that feels unstable, unfair? So, Rome does something risky. They begin hiring mercenaries, foreign soldiers, men who are not Roman, who don't share the same loyalty or identity. They fight for pay, not for pride. And while they are strong, their allegiance is fragile. Imagine an army where the soldiers don't truly believe in what they're fighting for. An army that can switch sides if the price is right. It's no longer a shield, it's a gamble. But wait, the storm isn't here yet. It's still building. Beyond Rome's borders, entire groups of people are on the move. The Goths, the Vandals, the Franks, tribes that Rome once looked down upon as barbarians. But these are not just scattered groups anymore. They are becoming organized, stronger, more desperate. And then something terrifying appears on the horizon: the Huns. Fierce, fast, and unstoppable, the Huns sweep across lands like a wildfire. Their arrival doesn't just threaten Rome directly, it pushes other tribes towards Roman territory. Imagine a domino effect. One force moves and suddenly millions are displaced, forced to migrate, forced to survive. And where do they go? Towards Rome. At first, Rome tries to manage it. They allow some tribes to settle within their borders, hoping to control them, to use them, maybe even to turn them into allies. But here's the twist. When you let the storm inside your walls, it's no longer outside. Tensions rise, mistreatment leads to anger, agreements are broken, and slowly those who entered as refugees begin to see themselves as conquerors. Meanwhile, the empire itself is splitting. In 285 AD, Emperor Diocletian makes a decision that changes everything. He divides the Roman Empire into two parts, the Western Roman Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire. It seems like a smart move, easier to manage, faster decisions, better control, but in reality, it creates a silent fracture. The Eastern Empire, with its capital in Constantinople, grows stronger, richer, more stable. The Western struggles. Its cities weaken, its economy suffers, its defenses thin out. Imagine two brothers. One grows stronger, more powerful, while the other slowly fades, struggling to survive. They are still connected, but not equal anymore. And this imbalance becomes dangerous, because while the East can defend itself, the West becomes vulnerable. And then it happens. The pressure that has been building for decades finally begins to break through. Barbarian groups don't just knock on Rome's doors anymore, they start pushing them open. Raids turn into invasions, skirmishes turn into wars. Cities that once felt untouchable begin to fall. Fear spreads like wildfire across the Western Empire. The people who once believed Rome was eternal now start to question everything. Is Rome really invincible? Or has the fall already begun, just too slowly for anyone to notice? And just when it seems like things couldn't get worse, a moment arrives that shocks the world. A moment that no Roman ever thought they would live to see. The city of Rome itself, the heart of the empire, the symbol of power, is about to face something it hasn't faced in nearly 800 years. An enemy inside its walls. But how did it come to this? And what happens when the eternal city is no longer untouchable? That is where the story takes a darker turn. And then everything changed. Not slowly this time, not hidden beneath politics or whispered in dark corridors, but violently, loudly, and in a way that shattered the illusion of eternity forever. Imagine waking up in the city of Rome in the year 410 AD. The air feels different. There's tension, fear, something unspoken. For generations, people believed that Rome could never be touched. It was the center of the world, protected by its legacy, its gods, its armies. But on this day, that belief dies. The Visigoths, led by their king Alaric, stand at the gates of Rome, not as visitors, not as allies, but as conquerors. And here's the twist. They were once part of Rome's system. They had served Rome, fought for Rome, lived under its rule. But betrayal, broken promises, and years of mistreatment turned them into enemies. Now they don't just want survival. They want justice, revenge, and power. And when the gates finally open, whether by betrayal or desperation, the unthinkable happens. Rome is sacked. For 3 days, chaos consumes the eternal city. Imagine the streets that once held parades and celebrations, now filled with screams and fire. Homes looted, temples violated, citizens running, hiding, praying. Gold and treasures, symbols of centuries of dominance, carried away by those once called barbarians. The psychological shock is even greater than the destruction itself, because this isn't just an attack, it's a message. Rome is no longer untouchable. And across the empire, that message spreads like wildfire. If Rome can fall, what is left? But here's where the story deepens, because the sack of 410 AD isn't the end, it's the beginning of the end. The Western Roman Empire, already weakened, begins to crumble faster. Leadership becomes even more fragile. Emperors rise and fall like shadows, many controlled by powerful generals or foreign influences. Real authority slips away from the throne and into the hands of military commanders, some Roman, many not. It's no longer a united empire, it's a fractured system barely holding itself together. Meanwhile, the Eastern Roman Empire watches, survives, even thrives. With its capital in Constantinople, it remains wealthy, fortified, and strategically strong. Trade continues, culture flourishes. While the West burns, the East adapts. Imagine two halves of the same body, one bleeding, collapsing, while the other stands, steady and alive. But back in the West, the storm grows stronger. New waves of invasions begin. The Vandals sweep through Spain and into North Africa, capturing vital territories that once supplied Rome with rain and wealth. Think about that for a second. Rome, the mighty empire, now struggling to feed itself. Hunger creeps in, stability fades even more. And then, in 455 AD, it happens again. Rome is sacked. Again. This time by the Vandals. Imagine the fear now, not shock, not disbelief, but dread. Because this is no longer unimaginable, it's becoming a pattern. The city that once ruled the world now cannot even defend itself. Treasures are stripped away once more. Whatever sense of pride remained begins to fade. But here's the darkest part of all. It's not just external enemies destroying Rome, it's Rome itself. Corruption still spreads like a poison. Political leaders continue to fight for personal power instead of unity. The army, once the backbone of the empire, becomes unreliable. Mercenaries dominate the ranks. Loyalty becomes a currency, something to be bought and sold. Imagine being a soldier now. You're not fighting for glory. You're not defending a proud empire. You're just surviving, following orders, maybe even questioning which side truly matters. And then comes a name that echoes through history like the final crack in a collapsing wall. Attila the Hun. Known as the Scourge of God, Attila leads his forces across Europe, leaving destruction in his wake. Cities fall, armies are crushed, fear spreads faster than his horses can ride. Even Rome trembles. Imagine hearing that name, Attila, and knowing that entire regions have been wiped out before him. And yet, in a strange twist, Rome itself is spared from direct destruction by Attila, not because of strength, but through negotiation, diplomacy, and perhaps sheer luck. It's a temporary relief, a breath before the final plunge. Because the truth is, by now, Rome is already dying. Not from one battle, not from one invasion, but from 1,000 small cuts. Economic failure, political chaos, military weakness, social division, each problem feeding the next, creating a cycle that cannot be stopped. And then we reach the final act. The year is 476 AD. Imagine the Western Roman Empire at this moment. It's no longer the giant it once was. Its borders have shrunk, its authority is weak, its emperors are shadows of what emperors used to be. And sitting on the throne is a young boy, Romulus Augustulus. Even his name feels symbolic. Romulus, the legendary founder of Rome. Augustus, the title of its first emperor. It's as if history is closing a circle. But this time, it's not the beginning, it's the end. Because real power no longer belongs to the emperor, it belongs to a Germanic general named Odosacer, a man who commands loyalty, strength, and control. And in 476 AD, he makes his move.
There is no massive battle, no grand siege, no dramatic final stand. Just a quiet, almost anticlimactic moment. Odosacer deposes Romulus Augustulus. The last Roman emperor of the West is removed from power. And just like that, the Western Roman Empire falls. Think about that. An empire that lasted for centuries, that shaped laws, culture, architecture, language, that dominated continents, doesn't end with a roar. It ends with silence. But here's the twist. Is this really the end of Rome, or just the end of one version of it? Because while the West collapses into chaos, the Eastern Roman Empire, what we now call the Byzantine Empire, continues to stand. For nearly another 1,000 years, it carries the legacy of Rome forward. Its people still call themselves Romans. Its emperors still claim the same authority. So, did Rome truly fall in 476 AD, or did it simply transform? And what about everything it left behind? Its laws, its ideas, its influence, they didn't disappear. They spread, they evolved, they became the foundation of modern Europe and beyond. But before we explore that legacy, before we understand how Rome lives on even after its fall, there's one final question that lingers in the shadows. Was this collapse unavoidable? Or could the greatest empire in history have saved itself if only things had gone differently? That is where the story reaches its final chapter.
Imagine standing among the ruins of a once great empire. Broken columns, silent roads, empty forums where voices once echoed with power. The air feels heavy, not just with dust, but with memory. Because what you're looking at is not just the fall of a city, it's the fall of an idea. Or is it? Because here's the twist. Rome didn't just disappear. Even after 476 AD, when the Western Roman Empire officially fell, something strange happens. The world doesn't suddenly forget Rome. Its systems, its culture, its influence, they don't vanish overnight. Instead, they linger, they evolve, they survive in ways no one could have imagined. Think about it. The roads built by Roman engineers, still used for centuries. The laws created to govern millions, they become the foundation of legal systems across Europe. The language of Rome, Latin, doesn't die. It transforms into Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, shaping how millions speak even today. It's as if Rome, even in death, refuses to let go of the world it created. But rewind for a moment, back to the collapse itself, because the fall of Rome wasn't a single event. It was a slow unraveling, a story written over generations where each mistake, each weakness, each missed opportunity added another crack to the foundation. Imagine a massive structure, strong, beautiful, unstoppable. Now imagine tiny fractures forming within it. At first, they're invincible. Then they grow, spread, connect, until one day the entire structure gives way, not because of one blow, but because it was already broken inside. That was Rome. Political instability turned leadership into chaos. Emperors rose and fell so quickly that the idea of stable rule became a memory. Corruption spread through the system, weakening trust, weakening unity. Economic troubles made life harder for ordinary people, pushing them to the edge. Heavy taxes, declining trade, and inflation created a silent suffering that no army could fix. And then, the military. Once the pride of Rome, the symbol of its dominance, became one of its greatest vulnerabilities. When soldiers no longer fought for Rome, but for money, for survival, for whoever paid them best, the heart of the empire stopped beating with loyalty. And when the heart fails, the body cannot survive. Now add the pressure from outside. The Goths, the Vandals, the Franks, the Huns.
But here's something important. These groups were not just mindless invaders as history once painted them. They were people, nations, families. Many were fleeing danger themselves, pushed by forces like the Huns. They didn't just come to destroy Rome, they came because Rome was still seen as something powerful, something worth entering, worth becoming part of. And that's where the irony lies. Rome wasn't just attacked from outside. It was absorbed, reshaped, transformed by those it once called outsiders. And then there's the division. When the empire split into East and West, it solved short-term problems but created long-term consequences. The Eastern Empire grew stronger, more resilient, more adaptable. The Western Empire slowly lost its strength, its resources, its identity. Imagine being part of the Western Empire in its final years. The sense of pride is fading, the fear is growing. You hear stories of cities falling, of armies losing, of leaders betraying. And deep inside, you start to realize something terrifying. This might not recover. This might be the end. And yet, life continues. That's the strange thing about history. Even as empires fall, people keep living. Farmers still farm, traders still trade, families still hope for a better future. The world doesn't stop. It changes. After Rome's fall, Europe enters a new phase, often called the Dark Ages. But even in darkness, seeds are planted. New kingdoms rise from the ruins of Rome. The Goths, the Franks, the Lombards. They don't just destroy, they build. They take pieces of Rome and combine them with their own traditions, creating something entirely new. And far to the east, the Byzantine Empire continues, preserving Roman knowledge, culture, and identity. Its capital, Constantinople, stands as a reminder that Rome is not entirely gone, just transformed. And then there's the Church. As political power fades, religious power rises. The Christian Church, which grew during the later years of the empire, becomes a unifying force. It carries forward Roman ideas, Roman structure, even Roman language. In many ways, it becomes the new Rome, not in form, but in influence. So ask yourself, did Rome really fall? Or did it simply change shape? Because if you look closely, you'll see Rome everywhere. In the laws that govern nations, in the architecture of cities, in the languages spoken across continents, in the very idea of empire, of governance, of civilization. Rome didn't just build an empire, it built a legacy. But here's the final haunting thought. If such a powerful empire, so advanced, so dominant, so seemingly eternal could collapse, what does that say about every empire that came after it? What does it say about us? Because the story of Rome isn't just history, it's a warning, a reminder that no matter how strong something appears, if it weakens from within, if it ignores its cracks, if it forgets the values that built it, even the greatest can fall. And now, as you step back and look at the full story, the rise, the glory, the chaos, the collapse, one question remains, echoing through time. Was the fall of Rome inevitable, or could it have been saved?